Hi, everyone. I'm Anne from Unit. I will be your host today. Yip is in Mountain Standard Time, so it is very early in the morning. So I'm just going to be your moderator today and give her some rest time, downtime. We've got an amazing guest with us today, Genevieve Leveille, and she has a track record in the space of AgriTech, and we're very excited to hear her share about her journey, but then even get into the details of what she's been building out with the amazing people in her network. Genevieve is here, but I would like to do a little intro on her. Her credentials are absolutely, I think there's so many in there. I could probably talk at half an hour just introducing you, but I'm going to summarize it. And I think she's done a great job on her LinkedIn profile, just explaining, her journey in a little summary. So I'm going to read it out right from there. She has been in the agriculture sector for a while. She's originally from Haiti, is the principal founder and CEO of AgriLedger. She has more than 25 years experience dealing with large corporations and banks and financial supply chain optimization. A lot we can learn from there. Very excited to hear her share. Her background is in corporate and institutional banking, with a reputation for the delivery of disruptive technologies and large-scale projects. Genevieve is recognized as an authority in the realm of digital identity and financial transformation, exploring the powers of distributed ledger technologies. For over 3 years, her work in the financial inclusion of Africa with her previous employer, the global bank consortium, IdenTrust, is well known. She is a finalist in the Women IT Awards in 2016, and she has multiple awards and certifications and credentials that you can read on her LinkedIn page, which I will share. So do follow her so that you can keep up with what she's doing in this space. She is currently the principal founder and CEO of AgriLedger. Genevieve, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. I didn't say, but I'm actually in the Dominican Republic. That's one of the things I have to say I am loving about the space that we're in, and that it truly allows you to make choices as to where you want to be. Obviously, there is a payment for it, which could be I have to wake up early every once in a while, but by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm done and I am free to go and play on the beach or something like that. Half the time, though, I still have work to do, but it's much more quiet time instead of being on calls. Going to give you a small presentation that I usually do. I think it's a great way of getting to know the story of what we're doing. And then after that, I'm really open to talking and also talking to you guys about the next step, what's going on and what I'm finding in terms of, I don't want to say challenges, but what are the next thing that we need to be looking at in the space? So let me start sharing my screen. Hopefully you're seeing everything. Yeah, cool. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about AgriLedger and also what the AgTech revolution is happening. I don't know if you guys had an opportunity to see last week, the BRI, which is the Blockchain Research Institute, did an interview with Dimitria, which a company I didn't have on the radar until then. But I have to say, I wasn't very good in listening to it because it was like pretty late. So I've given it to my MBA students instead to listen to. So this is Haiti. Many more, when I first started this about 3 years ago, most people didn't know where Haiti was. Unfortunately, last year, Haiti became very well known to the world because it had the unfortunate mishap of having its president murdered. However, what happens is that it's a very lush and beautiful island. That's why I'm sitting in the Dominican Republic, which is the other side. And you'll understand a little bit more why I do not want to be in Haiti at this point. Last year, we had 3 items that happened. First of all, we had COVID, which was continuing to ravage. They didn't get the vaccine on time, so which meant that there were a lot of unfortunate deaths. And now they're finally getting the vaccine and people are getting better, but also the president getting killed, a big earthquake, and then another devastating hurricane came through. Haiti is full of history. It is actually the first Black nation to regain her independence, and that was done through force, and that was in 1796, with it being ratified in 1804. It was the second country in the Americas after the US, but Haiti also paid dearly. By the way, this is La Citadelle in Haiti. This was built by Henri Christophe and is believed to be one of the engineering marvel of the world. It is considered one of the greatest, I would say, sorry for morning, marvels. And there you can also find cannons which no longer exist from all over the world. So when Haiti actually gained her independence, the slave built this so that they could see from the top anybody coming from any direction. And it took about 50 years. And the way that they say that those ramparts are built, even if a cannonball was to hit, it would not fall down. As a result, Haiti had to pay France the equivalent, by the time it finished in 1920, the equivalent of about $40 million. Plus, one of the reasons France made them pay, they were about 40% of the GDP. Haiti's sugar and coffee was worth more than all of the coffee coming out and sugar coming out of the UK, the English colonies. There is actually something I found I need to find again, which was around the sugar standard, which kind of mimics a bit of what we do in the tokenized world, which was there was a token, an asset token representing the sugar, and it was called the Sendobank standard, which would actually figure out how much sugar would be coming in and was helping trading. So that's something, a little bit of information that I really need to find again. So the Americans didn't want to trade with Haiti. And by the time they started trading another 40 years later, they made them pay dearly and they didn't pay them their fair share. So you can imagine this country has been, and this is Haiti in 2019, it had lockdown before the rest of the world knew what the word lockdown was. So they called it Paylock, which was country locked. And it was because of political unrest, which were brought on by economics issues. The Haitian government had received from Venezuela, when Venezuela had a lot of money, about 30% back on every dollar, so millions of dollars to help them build road and also to help Venezuela in its case against the US. When Venezuela had her own fail, they came back and said, can you pay back? And Haiti didn't have. And that's when the people found out, and that was called the Petro-Caribe, and it caused mayhem. So imagine a country which has been mismanaged for the last 40 years. You then have people going hungry and angry, and it was mayhem. Sorry. Now, that means the economic reality of Haiti is mostly around the whole concept of remittance. A lot of the money that comes in is about $3.7 billion a year come into the country as cash in the amount of about $50. Now, you guys who, as enthusiasts in the space, will be also glad to know that Haiti is at about 15-fold the rest of the Caribbean in terms of the Bitcoin activity. So about a month ago, someone wrote an article, and Haiti has over 100,000 people involved in Bitcoin. And when you look at places like Jamaica, it's about 30,000. So something is going on there that needs to be looked at. Haiti has been looking at the CBDC. Well, CBDC is not Bitcoin or crypto. And I think the key word there is central bank. So the central bank actually, let's just say, I wasn't very happy with whom they were looking at because I didn't think it was worth it. And unfortunately, I was proven to be somewhat correct because the organization was the one doing the Eastern Caribbean coin, central bank coin, and that has been down since the 12th of January, and they don't know how to bring it back. So in ways, I guess we in Haiti bit the bullet and didn't have to deal with that. So now, I think that what is so exciting about this space is really the decentralization of exchange of value. It's beyond this token aspect of the peer-to-peer, but how do you actually distribute equitably, not fairly, because fairly is different than equitable. How do you distribute that value? And that is what the distributed ledger, blockchain technology, crypto brings. It's the ability to fractionalize and then also to register, not just register who has done what, but to whom something belongs, to then be able to redistribute it accordingly. And it's very important, I think, to look at the use case as to why you use DLT. What are the challenges that are present? Where is the lack of trust? And sometimes I don't think that lack of trust is obvious, because networks will have been created to mitigate distrust. But the challenge there is when those networks are that they are not open network, which means that those who are participating are the only one who are able to participate, and the barrier to entry is then blocked to others. So we need to think a little beyond where is the trust issue, but also is this a closed network that only those who have the ability to participate because they have the capital or the know-how, and that's why they only can come in. Sorry. So when looking at this, agriculture is actually a great practical framework for this because there are many people involved. It is at times very opaque. We talk about the customer needing to know where things come from, but when we can usually know where it comes in from the big supplier, but we're unable to tell where it's coming in from the individual farmer. And one of the things that one should be aware of is about 70% of the world is smallholder farmers, people with less than 4 acres. And you would think, that must be Africa and Southeast Asia. No, actually the US also stands at about 80% of smallholder farmers, and same thing for Europe. And those individuals have limited access to finance. So they can avail them, about 10% of them are able to avail themselves of financial services in terms of loans, capital, investment, and things like that. And when we look at on a global basis, when they talk about the unbanked or the those who do not have access to financial services, that's many of them are those what would be the smallholder farmers or those people who are living below subsistence. So when we look at the challenge in agriculture, it goes from everything from food waste, lack of liquidity, lack of information, lack of financial inclusion, lack of trust, and lack of information has come to really, I would say, bite us in the ass as a world when we look at what's been happening in the supply chain. People obviously panic when it started with COVID. And I remember when it started, I said, we're going to have a problem in agriculture. And I was told, no, it's not. And unfortunately, I was proven to be correct. And I think that's something that is become as a result. Governments are either trying to deal with it by either taking over large swaths of land, aka the Arab Emirates, they're looking, or some of them had already started, such as China. Most people don't realize that China actually does a lot of its cultivation in Africa and ships it back to China. But I think in Europe, we've looked at it differently, either by recreating those markets within, but unfortunately, we all have become very enamored of things like sweet potatoes, avocado, oranges, and coffee, sugar doesn't stop. So that's something that needs to be looked at. And really, lack of information is what drives lack of financial inclusion. And one of the things, I don't know if you guys are aware, we talk about green gas. Do you know that about 19 to 25% of the green gas emission is caused by the food industry, which is higher than all of transportation together. This has to do with things not reaching market or being thrown, or when they reach market. So we always talk about the waste in terms of what we as individuals do, but we forget about the waste that happens throughout the supply chain before it gets to us, first at the farm level and even throughout the process. And so those are things that are actually much more damaging to the environment than we think about. Now, when we talk about value chain, there is what we would call the local market, where the farmer can actually have a process of ordering, or there is a very complex market, which is to get things to the consumer outside of the country. And that involves both internal and external transportation, which could be shipment or flight, storage, packing, warehousing, and then the retailer, and finally to the consumer. So being able to understand which one of the two paths is one question. And usually you will find that the local market can be very much of an informal market in many places. And then if you want to layer in the rest of the value chain, you need to make sure that the systems are there. And part of what's missing, not being shown, is the certification that needs to happen before it goes out, because guess what? Food is one of the most regulated spaces, and as it should be, given the fact that if we get sick from food, and I don't know if any of you unfortunately have had food poisoning, it is not something, and actually it is also causing a big issue for the planet in terms of the number of kids. So about 40% of children below the age of 5, about 600,000 a year are dying. And so we need to figure out how to make food safer for all. So sorry that it has the same presentation twice to go in. So I'm going to tell you quickly about Haiti. This is actually a little boy picture that I took from my iPhone. This is on my iPhone phones. It looks about 14 years old, and you see those mango, how big they are. They are about as big as his foot. Now, this was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so this boy should have been in school still. And that is part of it. We need to make sure that they can make choices to be whatever they want. If you want to be a farmer, there's nothing wrong with that. And if we look at Europe, we have plenty of PhD farmers. So let's make sure that that can happen and can be a choice rather than a burden. So quick question. Would you be able to guess what percentage of a farmer earns on a mango sold in the US at about $3? I'll give you a couple of seconds. And if any of you have seen this before, not allowed to cheat. Actually, 2%, and 98% lost to what we call middlemen. So what happens is that if you could imagine a world where it only took seconds to see how much went to a producer, because Walmart did do the one where you could say how in 6 seconds where the mango came from. But now imagine you could tell how much got paid to the individual. And this is something that we are making happen with the project that we did with the government of Haiti and the World Bank. So when we did the project, I actually thought the farmers, if I can get them to 20%, I've done my job. We actually found that 32% went to the service provider and 68% went back to the farmers. And this was with no one knowing that this was on the blockchain. It was just about bringing efficiencies. And there is an efficiency that sometimes we don't talk about, which is the efficiency of payment. So imagine that you gave me something, and this is why we see also the disparity in pricing. The farmer is very much aware of the length of the process, how many people have to be in between. So we are talking, as you saw before, there could be 5 or 6 different processes before it gets to market, before it gets to the wholesale market, not even the retail market. So which means that his money may come when it wants to, and he doesn't know if it will come, so he takes that discount, knowing full well that the market will be much higher. Now, by also making sure that the payment can be brought back to him in the choice that he wants, you can then allow him to really allow all these people, which are service providers. So instead of having middlemen, you have people who are actually doing work and are making sure that things are paid back. Now, we did a run in 2020 that was at the height of, that was May, height of the whole COVID debacle. It was about 38,000 kgs of mangoes, which were harvested. Of that, about 17,000 went to market. $40,000 was the value of the sale, with about 6 runs, so 6 mission, and 7.5 return to the farmer. So they went from earning 14 cents a kg to average of about 186 a kg. So this was, they received about $28,000. Imagine in the mix of COVID, people who normally would have made maybe $1,000 to $2,000 received $28,000 in this community. So really life-changing. Now, what's very important, and this is something which is key, it's communication. I like to say, we don't usually go into our bank account every day. So that smartphone really doesn't make a difference. What makes a difference is the messages for some of us that our bank lets us know when we've received money or we have spent money. So using that same concept, what we do is at the harvest, the farmer actually calls and says, I'm going to have. He then receives a message telling him when to show up at what time, which is the first message in his language in Creole. When he delivers, he's told, we have received 600 avocados from you. Then he gets message telling him when it's arrived, when when it's been shipped, when it actually arrived in the US, and when there's been a sale, and finally how much he will have. Each of the fruits, because this is avocado and it will change depending on the commodity, gets a QR code, which allows the customer to be able to look at the whole journey, plus also how much has been given to the farmer. And then the next thing is really to help connect the customer itself to the fruit, is to give them recipe ideas so that they can actually, and one of the things, so this is the application that the customer would say. And the first thing which is very important is this thing which says avocado. That's actually in Creole, which means your avocado. So it gives him a nutritional value, who was your farmer, where did it go to, so you can't see very well. You can see recipes, the work of it, its journey, and also the heritage of that. Now, the benefits to this, first of all, is empowerment, trust, food sustainability, cost efficiency, automation, improvement. And one of the things that it's really becoming key is that the US, the FDA is now headed by the guy who led the Walmart project, and that's Frank Yanis. And Frank has decided that he believes, and I think he's right, in this whole idea of food safety by being able to get at source the lot number. So by this year, so they started talking about September 2020, they're expecting the FDA to have a revisation of their act, which is the FSMA Act and 2004, and that is going to say that electronic records need to be sent within 24 hours. And they have some key indicators which must be captured. And it will need to be, depending on what it is, at the first supplier, not at the the supplier which is putting it all together. Now, what we thought by using blockchain technology is that we were able to get the know your customer, the payment, and the blockchain. We decided to use Corda, R3 Corda. And what we do is we have a permissioned database, obviously, and I like to, in reality, blockchain is a database. It's just a very special database in that it doesn't let you erase things. It doesn't, it allows you to append information, which makes it immutable. So it brings in trust. And if we start speaking of it as a database, that then allows what's coming out now, finally, that AI, machine learning, all those things, you can layer it and you can trust that at least the data that you're using is correct data and you know the source. And you also, to me, the biggest benefit is that you allow many to really participate without fear of being silenced or marginalized. So we chose R3 because to me, it was several things. First of all, I did think that it was one of the more stable permission. But the other thing is, the reality is I thought they're being used by banks, so big corporation and also government. So if there is a challenge with their code, I won't be the one who has to go and do anything. They will be forced by others. So I'll just be in the back waiting. Having worked in corporate, that was the thing. And I thought that in terms of risk, I applaud a lot of people who are building their own blockchain, but what they don't realize is that they're adding an added risk to their business, which is how do you protect the gates? So we'd like to think that blockchain is infallible. I would say the blockchain is infallible. We saw years ago that Ethereum wasn't fallible. We've seen issues with EOS. So we need to really, as we use these platforms, understand what are the risks and what are the risks that we're bringing to our customer or constituency or the network which is using it. Now, the solution that we have implemented or we look to implement is really a full end-to-end traceability platform, which allows pricing of the value chain. And I think it's very important to distinguish supply chain from value chain. The reality is, as something moves throughout the supply chain, it gains more value. And how do you distribute that value across the ecosystem is what's important. And I think that the participant or the protagonist can be sometimes protagonists which are involved very much on a daily basis, or it can be researchers, it can be the government. And that's why what we have done is we've also created an explorer, and the explorer maintains privacy while providing data. I will say it is not at the level that I would want to see it, but that is part of what we're going to be working on to really start providing better reporting and also to provide learnings that allows decision to be made. Now, I won't bore you very long about this. This is the architecture of what we've built. Very simple. It allows for integrations to payment providers, external API communication. We use Twilio to send messages back and forth to the farmers. And then there is a front-end application which allows for entry into the system and also the reporting. It's using both the Microsoft Azure and also the Google Cloud in order to be able to, the Google Cloud is a front end. We're using Firebase and then everything into Azure. One of the things that we're pushing is really to have everything on chain, but at the node level. Some people say, well, we shouldn't have everything on blockchain. You can leave it because there's going to be so much data. I'm of the other view. If you don't push the system and you say, oh, I won't do it, then how are we going to ever legitimize the use of the system at scale? So we need to push it and understand what needs to do to bring it to scale. And very quickly, this is really the banking aspect of what we do. It allows to use through use of smart contract to have payment instructions sent to the bank. So we didn't go with a tokenized system. You can imagine that the data that is created can be used to create tokenized environment, but I felt that I didn't want to have to look at being regulated or dealing with being a financial institution. Rather, I say that we are an orchestrator and that we see what's happening. We understand the music that is being played, and we send instructions as to what people need to do. And that can include also factoring and also having the bank distribute the payment. And as you can imagine, one of the organizations that could be paid is actually the tax government, and having the withholding of tax done accordingly. So this is really about the story of what has happened to Haiti. I will be very open to any questions. I know there's been a lot of stuff in the chat, and I'd love to talk to you guys about the next thing I'm grappling with, which is how do you create new, because we are creating a new way of interacting, but what I've found the challenge is, how do you create new business models? How do you get people to understand the business model and the charging model? So and that's something we're going to have to do in the space if we are to be successful. Because if you can't figure out how to charge for it, you then become reliant either on donor money or investment. And already we're starting. So this year, last week, CB Insight published a list of failures, startup failures, and we're starting to see a couple of blockchain companies come on there. So business models are not being met. It's not that the need is not being met, but if you can't figure out how you're going to charge people beyond the creation of a coin, you're not going to survive. So should I look at the question, see if there's any
Genevieve,
questions?
yes, I just want to say that that was so insightful. You managed to take us through the journey, at least an overarching journey of what is going on in the space of agri-tech. I think one of the questions that just springs from listening to you is, what would you say is the next step, like right now, that
the next step I've been living for the last few days. I actually last year was getting, so the USAID just dumped 50 million, and I call it dump because unfortunately that's the problem with aid. They would put a lot of money, and if we look across the world, there's been a lot of money both from most governments, you know, the German, the French, all of those putting in money to aid in the agricultural space. And we still continue to have the same challenge where the farmers, their lives are not improved. You know, is it the education, all of that? So I'm about to start 2 projects. One is in Tanzania, where we're going to be working on something called PACE project, which is really in the coffee, cocoa, sugar, to work with farmers who, some of them don't even have a phone. Imagine, they do not even have a dumb phone. That's how bad it is. So how do we communicate with those? How do we communicate to a community aspect? And how do we still respect the individual privacy is going to be one of the challenges. So that's the next implementation. And the other one is in Haiti, and that one I'm very excited about. It's something called, it's in the peas industries with women farmers, and it's using a financial concept called warrantage. Warrantage, to explain, is the idea of payment at the time of harvest, when, because everybody's harvesting at the same time, the price is depressed. and then having price discovery, so using people who know where to sell. And when the price is, so you put things in silo or in storage, and when the price increases, paying the farmer at that point a second payment. But you could even think of paying them twice, if you do it right, paying them twice the amount base, taking it in, and then with the blockchain, you can know what lot belongs to whom. And when it's sold, if it is higher than what you paid, having that difference be able to go to the farmer. And so what's been done is to set up a fund, which is, and the fund itself will make money. So think of it, it's really a token in a way, which is following, it's following the transaction and providing the farmer with that subsistence and that capital investment that is needed. And what we have calculated is the fund itself will be able to make 20%. We're starting with a fund of about 40,000. It'll be an eight-month project. And once done, we will look to scale. So as I was saying, USAID just put in 50 million, and they asked this organization to do some research as to what was available in terms of AgriTech. And I had about 3 interviews. And then last week, about a week ago, they came to me and said, we went back to the USAID and told them that you were the real deal in town, the only deal in town, and that they should help you because you mentioned that you wanted to find a way to no longer be reliant on donor money. What does that mean? And I was like, okay. So obviously, one of the things that I think happens is there is always a realization. So I will say with the World Bank project, my challenge to it was that we were looking only at the external market and also the removal of intermediaries, what were called unnecessary intermediaries. But we have to remember that sometimes there's a relationship management process that's needed. And how do you bring those people in is very important. Second thing is, how do you create liquidity in the system? Because what I've realized blockchain or technology can be like is, imagine you give somebody a pen and paper, but you didn't put ink in the pen. So what can they write? So although a system is very functional, the challenge is that unless people have some sort of money or some sort of ability to get paid before, because remember, the challenge for the farmer is that he needs money. It's like us, so imagine you work for 10 weeks and then you're told, okay, give me your work and then I will pay you in another 30 weeks. It's like, hey, what am I going to feed myself? I'm not going to be able to do the next piece of job. So we need to create mechanism. And this is where I think the beauty of the system is that you can start fractionalizing. And I'm even suggesting that you can fractionalize also. So one of the question we usually ask is, who pays for it? I get asked a lot of time, who pays? And I'm like, let's think of a different way. How about the products pays for it? And that's the key of how the token world works. The token pays for it. So when we talk, some of my argument when we talk about the use of electricity or, of token was the Bitcoin or Ethereum, I say, but think about it. It's being paid for as it's trading. Unlike when we have money printed by the US government, we pay for it after, and the cost is much higher. It's separate from the cost of the use of the currency. So if we start thinking in this way, how can then we create environment where people understand through the use what the cost is? So I do believe that the NFT is great in that now people are starting to understand the concept of trail. I remember before I would say trail to people and they don't understand. Well, a trail is who's owed what for their participation. but usually you cannot substantiate your participation, and you're hoping that the person will remember to pay you. So that's one of the issues when investment. So now if we can start thinking of these kind of concepts, either people can pay for usage or be paid because of their participation.
That's super exciting, Genevieve. Thank you for, elaborating on that. I think there are questions in the chat that actually you've already answered, which is great. But there is something that I want to just touch on from what you mentioned about the token. What is your understanding in regard to, you mentioned, that creating a fund and having people understand that they're participants, they're collaborators in this space, right? What is your, if you were to label or define the factors that would drive sustainability for this agri token, what would some of them be?
So, what happens is that I'm not an advocate of I'm not creating a token. I'm creating data that can be used by someone else to create a token. The reason is that I need to remain, it's very important that I'm providing a service. And if you start speculating on the service that you're providing, you then can be seen as not really being fair. So what I look to for AgriLedger to be is really a purpose-driven profit organization. So we need to profit as well as our constituents. So if they become very rich, we should also become very rich as a result. But if they remain poor, we should also be in the same boat. And hopefully that is not going to be the case. And I don't believe it will be the case. So in terms of what we're doing with that fund, it allows investors to invest and to have visibility. So when I was talking about 10% of farmers have access to investments, it's because of the risk factor. So you de-risk this by having data that shows where things are, what is happening, what is the true supply, which then means what is the true value of the output. Now, by tokenizing this information, you can then start fractionalizing. So we think of token fractionalization in terms of cell, but you can also fractionalize what makes the total unit. And usually those mathematical challenges cannot be done on Excel without breaking your computer or breaking the Excel. And that's the beauty of these algorithms that are being able to happen. So you can either have the data, you have data which is written that you know is true, and now you have machine learning and AI, which can give you those outputs in milliseconds to be able to make the right decision. So as an investor, what you want to understand is what's your risk and what is your return. Sometimes the return may only be psychological. I'm happy that I am making a difference. And versus I am sending money and I have no idea what's going on and things still look like shit. And that is the problem usually with remittance. People are sending money at home, working hard in the hope that their family, their loved ones will do better. Now, one of the studies that's been done, so Haiti has about 3.8 billion that goes there on a yearly basis in the amounts of average less than $100. Now, these are people helping their families, sending people to school, feeding, and things like that. But what happens is that those individuals, it is estimated, have another 5 billion in savings. And imagine you could, because I don't think you can take that 3.8 billion and say, okay, I'm going to turn it into now investment. Because at the end of the day, they are investing in the livelihood of their family. But that extra cash could actually make a return for them, because we all know putting in the bank doesn't get you a lot of return. And having a de-risked environment will be key. And I think that what we're starting to see, people are starting to understand beyond a token, because we have to recall it's about a holding, not spending of the token, which brings you return. But if you could have a return which is guaranteed, And unlike, let's say, if you want to buy a Coca-Cola share, that you can actually buy a fraction of it, then that allows you to actually understand what's going on. So I'm not suggesting that I'm going to do the token, but I'm suggesting that the data that I'm creating, it can be used by others. And one of the things that I did learn from my previous employers, which were GE, it's about collaborating. And through collaboration, you make each part stronger rather than, because I can then concentrate on doing my job right and then having that data be used to help not only enrich my livelihood, but those of the people. And I mean, I was talking yesterday to the project leader for Tanzania, and I said, imagine, I don't talk about it when I usually talk in terms of the possibility of what I can do, but we know who's the farmer, where they are, how things got to market, which means we know what the green expenditure is in that. And this is real carbon credit digitization that can happen from this data. And we can then start creating passive income for people, which are beyond the product that they are doing. This is something which is very much being, there's a lot of blockchain startups which are looking at that in Europe. But I think that needs to be a byproduct of what is being done rather than the first aspect, because then you start missing, because you're creating a wealth before actually making a change in how the process is being captured.
Great points, Genevieve. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to read some of the comments in the chat. So Keith had said, and maybe you can respond to this, your thoughts to it. He said, it's interesting, but it's a gift and curse. Global value chains help support economies in Africa, but at the same time, there isn't sufficient equity. What are your thoughts about that?
So actually, he's absolutely right, but this is the gift of then being able to understand what is an equitable distribution. And this allows for the transparency of what needs to happen. So the challenge sometimes is also around the documentation and the opacity, which is a result of the lack of transparency. So I will use as an example Haiti. 85% of the funds were brought back to Haiti. And that's usually not the case. And that will be the same in Africa, because in my recommendation to the USAID, I actually said that tax laws needed to be looked at, because in many of those places, the informal market continues because the formal market requires excessive taxation. So you are encouraged then to not participate, which then furthers this level of inequity, because those who can participate are shut out. And that's why I think that the value chains need to change, and those of us which are beneficiary need to understand what is actually happening, and then making those choices of voting with our money where we will spend where we'll spend our money. If you know that something continues to be opaque and does not clearly give you visibility, and that is part of ESG. No, we've been hearing ESG, and everybody talks environment. The S of ESG is social. So the social equity and the governance that has been brought in by having data is going to be the key. So I hope that answered the question for you, Keith.
There was a comment from Encore. He said, you could use case catering to farmers without a cell phone, which would be huge in India as well. A lot of our farmers are still without phones and technology access as well.
So we are doing, that's what we're about to do in Tanzania, because what happens is that, unfortunately, many people build for themselves. And we are now all used to having that smartphone. And we forget that people don't have a smartphone. And the answer is not to go and give it. I'll never forget I have a friend of mine who was talking to me when it was an argument, and that was my aha moment. He said, you're going to give somebody a phone, which is equal to probably half of their livelihood in a year. So what will they do with that? They will go and they will sell it. Says this is what happened, and when there was a big floods in Calcutta in the 60s, the American government had these pilots taking these really high risks to drop tents and nets and everything else. As soon as the water receded, you went to the marketplace and everybody was selling them because they needed the money. So the idea is here is to give information, to give income, and then give people the ability to buy themselves a phone if that is something that they want. But it is not needed because it's been proven with M-Pesa. M-Pesa uses technology to communicate information back and forth without people needing to have a smartphone. I experienced buying a shawl from a Massa warrior in the middle of the jungle in Kenya. And what I did was I sent him an SMS to pay him using M-Pesa. So if we can use SMS as a means of communication, because in reality, we all want to know where is our money, how is money being spent, and how much is earned. We don't even look really what's in our bank account. We have somewhat of an idea. And if we're expecting is only when we're going to log in. In reality, these individuals need to know that they have their money and their money is being delivered and that it's fair and equitable. And I actually say we should also, somebody's inability to read and write is usually based on the circumstances, but that doesn't stop them from understanding what is, being able to view and say what is 1 versus what is 10. They know the value of their money. So we should not think that a lack of reading and writing means lack of understanding of value.
Absolutely. It's the same in India. There's been so many instances where you talk about like the groups that I mingle in talk about value and people understand it. It doesn't mean that you need to read and write. There's a question from Sonia over here who says, how are you creating value addition to basic products? You mentioned true data and really being able to provide that transparency. Maybe you want to touch a little bit more on the value that you really hope to bring with what you're building out.
It's not me bringing value. It's the reality of the value as it moves. So if you think of coffee, when coffee is green, is on the tree, it has excess value. When it is dried and it is roasted, it now has higher value. Some coffee will be more valuable green, but that doesn't bring the value. It's the sell value, which is what is brought in. So it is really like everything else. As you bring in more components, or you transform it, or you get it from point A to point B, when it's at point B, it's much more valuable than when it was at A. As long as you start recognizing that growth in value, you can then redistribute it accordingly. So it could be a certification, like it's phytosanitary met. It is in a nicer box. It can be as simple as being put in a nicer box. It now has increased. Now, studies have been done, and people are willing to pay up to 20% more for knowing that what they're buying comes from where it's supposed to be coming from. So if you're buying an apple and you decide you want that apple to be from Washington State, and it says to you Washington State, and you're guaranteed that it's Washington State, you will pay more for it. Versus if you don't know, and this is where the challenge comes in, when there is food fraud, and believe me, there's plenty of it, and some of those cases are huge, you then start, so there was a story of blueberries that were supposed to come from Chile, and the blueberries actually came from China, went through Australia before coming to Chile and going back up to Canada. And that was millions of dollars of fraud. So if you can remove that fraud, what happens is that the value of those goods retain their value and doesn't get discounted because individuals don't know, is it real or not? So you will have certain goods which are very rare, but you don't know that it's coming. So Valencia oranges, is the sticker correct? Or is it, and we'll even talk organic, is the sticker correct? Or did somebody put it there? So therefore, because you don't know, the price value is lessened.
That's just the perfect segue into our next question by Andre. He says, thank you, dear Genevieve. This is great and convincing initiative. I have one question though. He says, if I've seen it right, you had a little avocado with a QR code. He said, there's a sticker with a QR code on fruit, which is finally sold. How do you make sure that the QR code is really referring to the correct blockchain path?
Because when we actually, so instead of printing a QR code, they pre-printed, and you basically are adding, so think of it like you're adding more information as it moves forward. So when you start, so I'll bore you, when you start, you have a lot number. So imagine the farmer brings 600, but 600 doesn't make it to final market. You want to not have more than 10% of waste or lost in there. But at some point when you're actually choosing and putting them in the box, there's a QR code on the fruit, on the box, on the pallet, and all that relates. So if you were to look at the pallet, you can tell which box are there, and then you can actually say which fruit and which fruit from which farmer. So that's the thing. Now, there's been a question of, oh, well, what could happen, people moving the stickers. First of all, good luck to them if they're going to do that. And in terms of knowing the correct blockchain path, it's actually, it's either going to work or it's not going to work. When you click that QR code, you're opening a web page, and that's, you can't, that is one of the security issues we're looking at, which is the 2-layer of the QR code. So one, which is who can write to it from a security standpoint, and then the other one in terms of reading. So as long as you're using your phone, you highlight it and then pull, and it will pull the information for you. So I'm not technical enough to build it, but my CTO has spent many years building for healthcare system and also digital identity. So I know that he did what's necessary. And also we had the situation where the World Bank actually hired R3 as an independent reviewer to review the code. And we only had, I'm very proud to say, we only had 20 issues that they thought that we should fix. And that's by standard of building a software for 2 years. That's so little. I was like, keep it coming. So just so you guys know, if anyone is interested, the code is also available on GitHub. The first outing was open source. I'm not sure that the open source model is the answer. I'm not sure that a closed source model is the answer in terms of business model, but the challenge of open source is going to be, how do you build a community of engineers and developers to keep improving it? But also, how do you test what they have done to make sure that it doesn't break the system? So we are about to embark into the next version, what I call the enterprise version, because I think it's important to also design the environment. So one of the challenges of Corda is the nodal system, how you spin those nodes. And I think that we were able to crack at least how to get data across. So it's the aggregation of data, which is going to be the next challenge for us.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. We normally go into breakout rooms, but we still got questions in the chat. We could keep you for longer, but we're respectful for your time and respectful for everyone's time on the call. So thank you so much for being with us super early, 5 a.m. in the morning, and really the amazing questions in the chat. We wish we could cover all of them, but please do connect with Genevieve on LinkedIn. And yeah, we're happy to have you here and see everyone back on Thursday for another mentoring session. Thank you, Genevieve.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.